Hello and welcome to Customer Value and Beyond. I'm Stephen Lewandowski and I'm very honored to have you join us today. Today I have the honor of presenting a very exciting guest to you who I've known personally for a long while and who I've worked with personally as well. And just as a little bit of an intro and that you know what's happening. So we're going to talk a lot about customer value, about how to actually deliver value to customers, but we will also touch a bit on current trends and some takeaways from what the current move towards AI and other tech trends will mean for B2B SaaS in general. This show is happening every Wednesday at 5 p.m. CET, and we're trying to find very authentic leaders for you, which you might sometimes not see on other webinars and podcasts. And we want to show you some true authentic leaders who have something to say. And today I have the honor to welcome Richard Anderson, who not only has around 25 years of experience in professional services and customer success, but also many years of experience as a chief operating and a chief customer officer. And Richard, welcome to the show. And why don't you maybe tell us a little bit of a fun fact that we won't find on your LinkedIn? Hi, Richard.
Hey, Stephen, good to see you. Thank you for having me on the show. Be gentle with me. I'm a podcast virgin, so it's a first time. Interesting fact. Well, yeah, I guess two things. First, I'm a big fan and a student of humanity, and some of the best times of my life have just been, when traveling and just being able to sit and just watch the world go by, either in an airport or in a customer project meeting or different things. I get a huge buzz in terms of seeing what we do as individuals, probably less so at a species level. But I think human beings are wonderful in terms of the individual capabilities, feats and things that we do. And we are a fascinating species. So I think that is definitely not on my LinkedIn profile. I don't think I'd get many discussions or interviews based on that, but it's definitely something I spend a lot of time doing. The other side of it, just as a strange one, I'm possibly, from a non-scientific base or from a tourist base, I may be the Guinness Book of World Record holder of the most times a UK male has visited Yellowstone National Park. So I was trying to count it up the other week, but I worked for an American software firm for a while, which had a headquarters in Bozeman in Montana, which was about an hour and a bit away from Yellowstone National Park. And so I've been there. I'm trying to recount exactly how many, but I've been there at least 20 times. So would always fly in on a Saturday, would always acclimatize myself on the Sunday to American time zone. And so Sunday would always be a get in the car, go to Yellowstone National Park for the day, and it was just a brilliant, wonderful place to go. So
very nice.
Yeah.
And I've never been so far, right? So you just sold that park very well. So I have to go at some point. And I think another fun fact is you actually fluently speak German, live in the UK, but are currently in Norway, right?
Yeah, Norway visiting and working with a team. But I grew up in through a sort of a relative thing to my father's role. Grew up in Switzerland and so lived there for 14 years. Learned how to speak and understand and write fluently. So it's kind of like my second mother tongue. Learned how to ski. Learned how to do a number of other things. So I was very fortunate as a young person.
Nice. And looking at your background, right? So you've done amazing things, from being a business analyst to being in professional services, in customer success, been a chief operating officer, chief customer officer. You had your own consulting and advisory business going on. So what are maybe some of, or let's say some unexpected skill that you gained during that time where you think okay, that's something which I would not have expected I would appreciate that much after such a long career already?
I think maybe to say probably the skill that I think I value the most is actually what I call being nosy. And by that, I mean, I ask why a lot. And I ask why from a perspective of trying to understand. I think particularly in technology today, people are very quick to try and come to a decision, try and come to a solution to a problem, sometimes to a solution to a problem that actually doesn't exist. And I think trying to understand the why and the where with all. And sometimes the what as well is actually what really drives and helps us get to either a solution or to understand a customer situation that helps us really come to the important things that we should be discussing, right? So to really understand, why a customer uses what technology you use or what business problem you're trying to solve, you kind of use why and interchangeably what a lot, in my opinion. And so that for me has always been the best skill and the skill that I think has for me generated the most value. Some difficult conversations sometimes, but it's been, that I would recommend to anybody, make sure that you can develop that real understanding of trying to get to the why and the what of the situation, because that's incredibly illuminating.
And I probably wouldn't even just promote that idea for business as well. I have a feeling nowadays that is something we could probably relate to many more topics, right? To not come to conclusions, maybe not judging too quickly, which is something I try to promote as an idea in general, also quite a bit. And what do you think? What do you think that comes from probably a very consultative mindset of really being aware that from your experiences, you have to get customers to like a tangible, valuable solution? Do you think it's coming from that area, or is it really more like, as you said initially, from like a humanity standpoint of just a natural curiosity of what people are doing?
That's a great question. I think it started off as natural curiosity, because I'm somebody who, if I read up something and I don't understand it, I want to try and understand why. Or if I see a reference to somebody, let's say a famous person, and I haven't heard any news from them from 10 years, I'll start to look up what they're doing these days, right? I'm always kind of, interesting in that regard. But from a career perspective, I think it's probably in three things. I wanted to sort of dig into that to kind of get an understanding of what customers are doing and why they're doing it. I then wanted to use that and apply it to either a setup or configuration or what problem I are trying to solve. But then more as I got into the SaaS environment is actually, I need to understand this to actually really help the customer change either their business process, the approach that they're doing, how to measure things. It actually became around how to frame the right conversation, to have the conversation with customers about how to really, they're talking to me as a supplier or a consultant or whatever. They esteem that I have experience or value. And so to be able to track back the real value that I'm giving them is actually how to optimize or how to change or how to do something better tomorrow than they're doing today. And those consultative set is what gets you the ability to be able to provide that guidance and advice.
Yeah, I love that. And what thought I had while you were describing that is that I have the impression that depending on the maturity also of organizations, and I think in customer success, this is oftentimes, at least to me, quite apparent, is that the lower the maturity of the team and the approach on how to work with customers, the let's say the less you know what your customers are actually trying to solve, the harder it is also to educate your teams and to really get your teams to that point that you're actually solving these business cases for your customers, right? That they're really working on these solutions to issues and not just like filling gaps that you might have in your processes, in your product, or in other areas.
Yep. And it's where I've probably spent the largest amount of my time is sort of coaching and mentoring in many ways on the basics. So, everything from project management 101 as to why you're doing something, why the customer is asking for this, and is what they're really asking for. They're talking to you about features and functionality, but it goes back to that saying that nobody wants a 12-inch drill bit, they want a 12-inch hole. How they get the 12-inch hole is a whole other discussion, but they're asking you for the drill bit, where actually you kind of need to translate that into your own words. It's the same with customer success, right? If customer success don't really understand, I guess the stages of maturity, or in the nicest way, how to even be a CSM in your company, right? What is those things that you need to get through? That makes it incredibly difficult for them to do the job. And I think that's what a CCO, COO, or head of department, right, is you need to figure that out. You know, how complex is your software? Is it everything is implemented and onboarded at once, or are there stages of maturity based on the complexity, the dynamics in the customer environment that means that maturity and experience and adoption occurs over a period of time? And in some industries with some software, it can be all at once. Others, it can happen over sometimes months, sometimes even years, where it takes a customer to really adopt. And it's a game of inches and yards in that regards, that then the different teams need to play. So you know, it's never a one size fits all. It's certainly, my experience tells me across multiple disciplines that, you know, that's something that you have to figure out, and that then is where you kind of play a lot of your time. But I would say historically, probably about half of my professional career of the last 25 years is spent with coaching, mentoring, blocking and tackling, and kind of really making that work, because that's where the secret source of the customer value comes from. It's from understanding those customer use cases. And then probably most importantly, if you think you have 5 use cases for why the customer is using your solution, I can pretty much promise you there are another 5 use cases that you've never thought of, but the customer is actually using your product for, that you never envisaged. And it's being close to the customer to understand what those are.
Absolutely. And also understanding their drive why they're doing certain things, right? I think also oftentimes it comes down to understanding what is actually the job of the stakeholder you're talking to, right? What are they actually doing? How are they measured? Who are they reporting to? How would they internally look at their outcome if that was successful, which might have nothing to do with your software, right? Which might just be an outcome of that process. So do you understand who are the process owners internally? What processes might be touched by that software, right? What's actually happening internally? And maybe you have an example for that, because I think especially in that area, there are oftentimes such interesting and sometimes also almost crazily interesting stories of how certain companies either gain value or what they understand as their value. Did you ever have in that area, did you have like a pinch me moment or something where you thought, okay, I can't believe we're actually talking about this, either in a positive or in a not so positive sense? Did you ever have that in terms of the value that was derived from their approach?
Yeah, a couple of examples. So I think, and they didn't initially come in either the sales cycle or during onboarding or whatever. They kind of happened after the event. And you know, we work with in one organization I work with, we work with a very, very large pharmaceutical company. And you know, when you think about it, the product that we did allowed if you took a very, cynical is probably the wrong word, but if you took a very high level view, we enabled a company to procure and buy things in a more structured and speedy way. But when the outcome of it came, you know, when we kind of did like a review and caught up, one of the executive sponsors was just sort of was sharing with me what the benefits of the program were. And the way they outlined it is that what we did enabled them to bring life-saving drugs to market 6 months quicker, which was like a 30% improvement. So when somebody tells you that, you're like, wow, right? And that again is, you don't go into those conversations knowing that. That's what you have to figure out over time. The second one is a little bit more, it was an amazing moment, but it was also rather sad, right? I mean, in my father's generation, it was kind of everybody knew where they were on the day that JFK was assassinated. In my generation, being above a certain age, it's kind of everybody knew what happened on 9/11. And I remember 9/11 very, very well. I was actually unwell on the day and had a high fever. So when I saw the first broadcasts of a plane, which was actually the second plane hitting the Twin Towers, I thought I had a fever. But at the time when I realized it wasn't, and actually we were doing work with one of the big flag carriers, airlines, I immediately sort of rang our sponsor at there, who, you know, we'd kind of had a project and we're doing a bunch of work with them. And I just sort of said, hey, look, how are you doing? What's going on and what's happening? And the outcome of the software that we deployed at the time, which was all around knowledge-based knowledge management, self-help, automated email, in the very early 2000s, we actually allowed that flag, or we enabled that flag carrier to survive the events of 9/11 without the call center burning down, without an interruption in service, being able to help give information and guidance to friends and families who weren't necessarily affected because their friends and family weren't on the airlines, but with all of the confusion, the chaos going on, they were able to make sure that people got the information they needed, like who to contact and whatever else, without the call center burning down, right? So, and again, it sounds like one of those things, but when you do, you get sort of the shiver on your back when you remember those conversations and stories. But it's kind of those values are things that you would never have been able to foresee and understand. But when you really, when certain things happen or certain things are shared in that way, you get a different perspective of how sometimes you should think about and how you should codify value and how to ask and talk to people about it.
Absolutely. And I think especially that trying to understand basically the value after everything that happened in that process, maybe, right? So I really loved your example. And of course, during that, all these thoughts about that time come to mind, right? So I also know exactly where I was at that time, right? Because I was still kind of learning my first job as being a project assistant around the IT, my first IT job. And I was actually, I wanted to visit my mother after the working hours, and I wanted to visit her German time, and had a bit of time to spare. So I walked through a Kaufhaus, like a shopping mall, like a multi-store storage or multi-story building. And at the top floor, there was like the TV department, and it's still, I get shivers by that. That was also the reporting still of the second plane, because it actually happened during my train ride. And there were like 45 TVs all over this place, and all like showing these pictures, right? And this is just so engraved like into the back of my mind that that's something you'll never forget. But looking into this impact topic, one example I also really loved about that was that sometimes you support customers in, for example, increasing the efficiency of, and the easiest example is like a translation process, right? You help them improve a translation process for a software, right? Which is great, and everybody thinks, hey, that's cool, and it helps us work with customers from different markets, and this is great. But of course, if you continue that thought, it basically doesn't just help you translate software quicker, it helps you probably go to market in new markets much quicker, right? You develop a software, you translate it, and probably, I don't know, for the market in India, for example, you can translate it 30% quicker. Therefore, you might be able to start your sales machine in that region much quicker. And that is the true impact you need to get to, right? You don't want to just talk to the team that's working on, like, in this example, the translations, but understand what's like at the end of the tail, right? What is really happening at the end of that, where the true value is gained, right? And I think this is still, sorry, yeah.
No, you'll continue to see value, right? And yes. I think you have your first hypothesis of where a customer gets value. Once you've done that, there'll be a whole other things that continue to build off the basis. And you, of course, have to keep reminding customers of the value that you've created so far, because it's in human nature that you forget. And the things that you did a year ago, they've now become the baseline, and you then have a new baseline to learn from. But you also just have to continue to keep reminding the customer in the nicest way that, this is where we started, this is what we've done, these are the next things. But there is always more to do, and the more you can educate, enable, and really make your customers self-sufficient, then that gives you being that kind of partner, being that kind of person that helps them change and transform a process, gives you the permission to then continue to do other stuff with them. And for me, that customer value is not a one and done thing, it's a continuous improvement process.
Yeah, and that's why I also think that it's such an important topic. And last week I talked a lot about that with Dan Steinman, where we also joked a bit around if there's a role for like a chief value officer, if that's a CEO's job, and sparred around that a bit. But I thought
I think differently, if I may. I think differently. Well, this for me is also another thing, right? Career pathing is hugely important for us as a company, and I'll come back to. Customers have always proved this to me, right? If you listen to customers' use cases, that they show you why career pathing is incredibly important, and I actually think technology business don't do enough on this. But I go back to this isn't necessarily a chief value officer. You have to, and I think if I remember Dan's comments on this, is that you have to kind of create a career path for your people, and the career path goes in one of two ways. It either goes into people leadership or it goes into, in my view, value creation. Yeah. And so the benefits that your organization derives is you have your super project manager, your super consultant, your super CSM that really understand the basics, but they're also out there thinking, what does future value look like, right? And you have to build the career paths to be able to say, right, you've done the CSM thing or the project manager thing or the support agent thing, you've done that to death. You need to find 25, 30% or whatever of your productive time to be thinking, what does the future of this look like? And I think that's a massive, people just get hugely excited about that, because if you shape it and you not sell it, but you position it in the right way to them, it's a really, really major aspect to their career, because you're giving them the challenge, you're giving them, a different way to use that muscle that's become incredibly strong, incredibly resistant, incredibly, useful and a great lift for the organization. I think it's something that you build into a career path. If you give it to somebody else, like a chief value, do they really understand the business? Do they really, it needs to be people that work with customers all the time. So for me, I've always built it into the career pathing of my teams.
Yeah. And I think what I really love about your idea is that it kind of also makes it repeatable, right? You might create a process and you might create a template, which you also might be able to use in different organizations, because what we discussed last week was probably a bit in an ideal setting. You would have the CEO as probably also like the chief evangelist and somebody who's just striving in that area and who's able to kind of motivate the whole organization. But as we both, from discussions, I know we probably think alike, it's not always the case, right? You don't always have the CEO that kind of can fulfill that position, right? And you might not have maybe the right mindset or the approach to also motivate the whole organization behind that, right? Because people leadership also from the CEO down is a different topic. But, and this is where I wanted to get to, is once you do that, right? Once you have this shared understanding of value and you understand the impact, and I think your truly impactful story you shared earlier was really an example of that. If your organization understands these success stories, right, I think it's such a powerful glue and motivator for your whole organization, not just customer success, not just sales, marketing, right, but the engineers, everybody in back office, everybody that's able to kind of understand what true impact your organization has and what you're truly driving for the organizations and individuals that work with your product, right? And I think that's such a powerful also culture multiplier for your organization to just say, hey, everybody, we have a true impact, right? Let's work on that. It's not just about feature functions, but let's drive that impact. Maybe impact is even a better word, right? Let's drive impact.
Yeah. I think every my experience is every exec or every member of the leadership team kind of cares about value. They do it from a different point of view. I think the ones that probably spend the most in the topic of that is usually a chief customer or a chief operating officer. It's usually a chief marketing officer, and it's chief product officer, because they're the ones that have to figure out how to deliver it, how to build it, and how to message it. Very, very closely followed by your sort of chief revenue or chief sales officer, because they've obviously got to be able to sell and position it. I think, over the years, I've realized, both from a desire and probably from where I fit, I never want to be a CEO, because the type of, to be a CEO, you have to do certain things, and they actually spend more time helping drive their team and do certain things and work with the board above them, right? And I've always actually thought, that actually just takes me away from customers, and which is where I get most of my energy from. So, I think that it's hard to then, the CEO has to do a number of different things, but sort of expecting the CEO to be the chief value creation officer is a hard ask, given everything else they have to do, and then their potential distance away from customers and the coalface, right? And when it comes down to it, I've met very few CEOs that actually have the time to spend a huge amount of time with customers. That's just the challenging nature of being a CEO today, right?
Absolutely. But it's such an important sign, right? So I think as long as you kind of make sure that for like the most important customers, the most important deals, events, and these things, you kind of have them on board, right? I think that's crucial. Otherwise, that would typically fall to like the CRO, CCO, right? Who might also have a say in that.
I'm a big fan of executive sponsorship anyway, right? Kind of what the things that, executive leadership gives air cover to project teams, to CSMs, to whatever. So as much as possible, I work to pair up ELT members at steercos or at different customers, depending on life cycles. So, for me, that's also a thing that I see many companies probably not doing as well as they could and should. It's another sort of bit of ammunition in the arsenal, as it were.
Yeah. Did you see maybe a bit of a change in, maybe speaking about your experience as like more like an operating partner, right? Working as an advisor with different companies. Did you see some kind of change or some kind of trend there in maybe the last 2-3 years where some of these ideas might have changed, how executive teams work together, how they share this responsibility, or is it pretty much the same it's been for the last decade?
I think it has variations of, I think what there are some debates on different topics, like, and some of them, in my view, can be quite unfortunate. It comes down to who owns what. And the word owns for me is quite a divisive topic, because it talks about, I have this responsibility and this is my job and this is my silo, basically. The word owns kind of who
owns the customer?
Yeah, and that's a terrible one, right? As soon as a company's talking about I own, somebody says I own the customer, it's like, no, nobody owns the customer, right? The customer decides how long that relationship lasts. And so I was giggle a little bit about that one. But I think the pressure on leadership teams that exists today, with kind of funding being very different than it was, like 4 or 5 years ago. Kind of the era of free money has ended. Pressure in commoditization of markets, etc. It does make it challenging sometimes for the teams to collaborate, and it also becomes sometimes, in some of the work that I've done, just being a bit of an advisor to the CEO around the whole, like, are your metrics and goals actually lined up with each other? Or in some cases, they're actually driving competition between, let's say, your chief sales officer and your chief marketing officer, or between your chief product officer and your chief customer officer, right? And that becomes the way to architect that. So I don't necessarily think the game has changed. I think the pressure has gone up a number of micro atmospheres, right? Which makes it more challenging.
Absolutely. And I think, and we talked about that recently as well, right? Looking at what changes now with like the evolution of AI, right? So machine learning has been around for quite a while. Everybody that's also looked at different kind of products which had some kind of like predictive mechanisms in there, right? Which had some kind of scoring systems in there. There's usually been some aspect of machine learning, right? So, and now with the rise of LLM, or how it's called, things get a bit blurry maybe and a bit chaotic, right? And from a focus perspective, now everybody talks about AI, but again, probably many mean different things when they talk about it. And looking at the topic of running a business, managing a business, focusing on areas to improve, maybe, where do you think currently are the biggest gains you can have with AI, looking at an organization, not just the customer-centric ones, but as an organization in itself? Which areas should you maybe look at when also looking at AI, maybe also with a bit of your experience that you gained over the last years, and which are areas which you might not touch at the moment?
I would say, first and foremost is that AI is a data project, right? And spent time with different organizations, but also organizations that I've led where actually I have to get my data strategy in order for AI to actually prove any value. Just sort of throwing AI onto a set of unstructured data that might produce some results, but it's highly unlikely to turn out to be a very customer orientated or very satisfactory project, I would say. And so in some of the companies where I've been working with them to try and figure that out, particularly more on the sort of, I guess, the customer service side rather than anything else, is what is the reason that what is the kind of the goals that you're trying to achieve by doing this, right? What is AI meant to do for you tomorrow that you're not getting done today? Yeah. And then underneath that, what data underpins that? Because just like human beings, AI is only as good as the data that it's provided to it, right? We make decisions based on data. We as human beings have the ability to leap a little bit beyond that and to guess and to summarize and to theorize, which AI to an extent doesn't really have, right? Well, at least LLMs don't, right? LLMs are just like based on these occurrences, what's the most likely thing to happen next? So, again, it's that structured data thing. So I'm spending, or have been spending more time really kind of getting people to think about their data. And data is a great example of like what data will really drive decisions and what data will really drive outcomes. And I think, and sometimes be careful of what you ask for because it drives unintended outcomes. And I'll use a good example where a company I work for, we had a huge amount of transactions, a lot of customers with small upsells and cross sells. And we noticed over a period of time that all of a sudden a whole bunch of transactions just dropped off. And we couldn't figure out why. So we did a bit of analysis to understand, what was it? Were customers really unhappy? What was going on? And it was a little bit, CSAT was starting to be affected as well. We were seeing some negative feedback. And what it actually turned out to be is that we'd architect a pretty complex and weird set of rules in our CRM system. So it was actually Salesforce we were using. So it's not Salesforce's fault. It was ours. We configured it that way. But what happened is for a sales rep to close or an account manager to close a deal, it took them about 25 minutes. And there was a ridiculous number of form fields, data stuff. And so a sales guy looked at it and said, just a reasonable conversation for me to close this upsell on which I'm going to earn 20 or 30 pounds. It takes me half an hour to do. I'm just not going to do it. And all of a sudden, the back end of that is that upsells and cross sells go down. Customers, of course, are really upset because they've asked for something and they don't get it. But it takes time for that to happen. And for really bona fide and good reasons, sales ops wanted to get some control of data. They wanted to get some structure. But what they did was just way over complexified and then had a flow downstream. So again, going back to that, be really clear on what you're trying to achieve, what you're not doing today, why, and what is kind of the minimum you need. And I think things like best practices in things like e-commerce and ERP, they've been around for donkey's years, but we keep going back to failing them, right? How many surveys do you get with like, please answer 10 questions? It was a well-known fact 20 years ago that if you have more than 3 questions, each question that comes after those 3 questions, the drop-off rate in survey completion is 50% each time. So by the time you've asked 10 questions, the amount of people that will actually respond to that survey is incredibly minimal. So the data set that you get to tell you things is very, very small. So again, it's just have that in mind, have the customer experience in mind, have what you're trying to achieve and trying to keep it as minimal and as structured as possible. Yeah. That cuts across AI for me is that's where I see many companies struggle with. I'm a huge believer in what AI will do and can do for us. I'm not fearful for my generation. I think my generation is kind of like, okay, we're there or we're thereabouts. I don't think AI is going to have that much effect for us from that regard. And we probably also don't see that many use cases. But I'm a little bit intrigued and possibly fearful for my son's generation, early 20s, right? What that means and what the future for them will be. So I'm trying to help him navigate that at the moment.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good advice for all the parents out there, right? That's a good topic to keep an eye on. Yeah. But it's funny what you just said about the focus with AI. It kind of reminds me also of many of the scars that some of us have of early implementations of customer success tools, right? And CRMs and other systems, which a while ago just implemented that thought into our minds that call to actions is the way to go, right? And call to actions here and call to actions there. And then you had a dozen data triggers, which triggered another, I don't know, there was an NPS vote, there was a CSAT, there was an adoption was going down, adoption was going up, and there was a lead here and an opportunity there, right? And you have 170 call to actions in your inbox, and nobody cares really about the call to actions anymore, right? And I have a bit of a feeling that we're in a bit of that tornado now as well, that everybody thinks you need to solve everything with AI now, and you have to kind of find all these use cases where I've been in engineering for a short bit of my career, where I think this engineer always looks at it like, okay, this is just one puzzle piece in my tool set now, right? I have certain frameworks, I have certain approaches to do, I have to look at data and process, and somewhere there might be a little puzzle piece, which is AI, right? And that might help me improve the data, or look up something in the data, or do research, right? Find something on the web or in some content or in my RAG or whatever I have, right? And make that data usable. And I think looking at it from that perspective helps in not falling into the trap of thinking, okay, I will solve everything in the next 2 years.
Yeah.
And saying, okay, I need very specific areas where I can use it in a smart way.
We're in the hype cycle for AI at the moment, and it's, I've been through this with on-premise software. I've been through this with mainframes. When I started in software as a service, 2000, the saying then was on-premise software is going to be dead in 10 years. Here we are 25 years later, more than, depending on who you talk to, more than half of the software revenue is still from on-premise software. It's amazing how many banks, how many production lines still use mainframes. Mainframes were going to be dead, right? But no, actually what happened is they were upgraded and they're connected to the internet, right? So I think it's the same with AI. And I look at AI as an incredibly smart, incredibly energetic, and very open, young research assistant, and a bit of a sparring partner. And when we talk about customer value, I'm using it at the moment to help me build out what that looks like. I have this hypothesis. What kind of metrics and ROI would you put against that? So if you're a certain customer persona, if you're certain things, what are you typically measured on? What are the things that you care about? And that I'm using AI to bring back different kind of use cases, different thought processes, research articles. I use it to summarize meeting notes, make me more effective in follow-ups. I use it to document key things. And so there's a bunch of use cases that I start off with personally, and I'm starting to develop those over time, right? And I think do the basics, start off with there, and just continue to improve on that, right? The big thing, the whole, the stories that I've read of people saying, tomorrow the engineers are going to be developing complex software by using prompts. I'm like, okay, good luck. The prompt that you need to develop an ERP software that covers logistics for a $30 billion organization, that's like 20 Bibles long. That prompt engineer needs to build that. Okay, may it happen in the future? Absolutely, but it's not going to be tomorrow. It's going to take a while.
Absolutely.
And so it's those kind of things.
Yeah, and I really loved what you said about like connecting also the AI topic with the value. And I would really love to learn from your perspective where you think are the areas, especially regarding customer value, where this can already help today. Because I've been working with a very exciting company from the US, which is building like a value case for sales, for value selling, like a case tool, right? That's helping you build up cases with especially enterprise companies to sell the software. And there have been others that also try to have SDRs leverage AI tools, right, to kind of improve how they do outbound, how they approach potential customers. What do you think actually for the value delivery of the vendor in professional services, in customer success, in really working with existing customers? Where do you see the potential for AI to help understanding those, let's call it ROI topics, right? Where do you see the biggest potential for that?
Yeah, I think, and I'm slowly getting myself into like the SDR conversation because I'm just intellectually curious on what they are and the different tools. Some of the main ones I'm seeing are about providing more information about the prospect you're talking to. So again, into that research assistant. I see some that are going into the process of and actually, you know, holding calls and conversations. I think that's fascinating. I haven't yet seen any outcomes of that, and whether they're really effective at doing that. And does, you know, is the close rate better? All of those kind of things. So I'm open to almost anything. You know, I'm kind of interested to see what use cases it may be. I think the way they're being coached to me is that it makes it easier to do my job. Whilst that's fascinating, it doesn't mean it decodes value for the customer. So like I go back to if I have an AI that can do project management for me and manage my onboarding project, that's great, but that's a set of tasks. How does that translate into, I can translate that into customer value? Because once the customer's onboarded, that's a very, very singular point and a very one-time usable point of value. Once they're onboarded, well, great. What happens then? And I think I'm yet to find a technology vendor. I'm yet to find something that helps me go to that next level. I think there are point use cases. So, you know, there are things that link into the customer life cycle of, hey, you know, your executive sponsor at this account has changed. You know, it goes and finds that and it tells you, great, that's a warning signal, that's good. But it's again, that's a very internal specific value case, and I'm less interested about those internal ones. I'm more on the external side. But then to be able to do that, you know, I'm sat there thinking, well, it's hard enough for me sometimes to really figure in. It's hard enough for the product organization. It's hard enough for CSMs to do that. How is AI going to help me there, right? You know, that link I'm yet to see. Doesn't mean I'm going to stop searching for it, but it's the value cases is very much about your own speed, your own process efficiency, and yeah, can your AI software make a customer's process more efficient? Yep, probably, possibly. You know, I probably haven't worked in detail inside an AI vendor to help make that, but I do look at it. You know, a lot of the vendors I've seen, probably half of which are actually, they're looking for a problem to solve at the moment, and that's why we're in the hype cycle. And I think, you know, it goes back to how many of the vendors that are out there today based on AI are going to be around in 5 or 10 years time. Right, that's the test of time.
And that's the perfect segue. So looking into the future, maybe let's look 5 years into the future with all we've discussed around maybe the impact of AI, with the change of roles, with the change of organizations, change of the world, whatever might happen. What do you think, especially in B2B SaaS, what will be completely different in 5 years' time? If you look at B2B companies in 5 years, what do you think has significantly changed? Looking at process, roles, tools, B2B SaaS in general, what do you think completely changes?
It's hard. It's probably less of a futurist, more a wish perspective, right?
Feel free to grab a glass bowl, right? Look into
yeah, no, I mean it's look, the obvious one, I won't talk about it really, is AI will change what we do. There's no doubt about it. But what absolutely has to change is that we need to decode and really become much better at being able to architect, define measurable customer results, measurable customer outcomes. And I am still to this day quite often underwhelmed by how many companies that either I speak to or have, you know, just even open conversations with CEOs who are trying to figure things out, where they brought a product to market and they still haven't quite got their ideal customer profile. They still haven't quite got, you know, the value that derives from it. And even then, what I think must happen is, have you actually validated that with your customers? Have you spent a ton of time really digging into that with your customers? And I think my wish, rather than what I think will happen in 5 years, is my wish is that companies spend more time doing that and really digging into that topic, because in my view, not enough of that is done today. And I think many organizations start up with a view of, I have this view of my product fits this need, and then the rest of it kind of follows suit. And that's everything from value creation to organization planning and design and you know, I'll probably enter into a hairy conversation here, but one of the things I spend quite a bit of time is does every organization actually need a customer success department, right? In my professional life, I've deconstructed 2 customer success organizations because the product, the market it served, the strategic nature, and where the product actually fitted into the customer life cycle meant customer success didn't really add any value. It didn't need to. The product just needed to work and onboard incredibly quickly. So I think there's that. What needs to happen in the future is more thought process around how, what problem are we solving for our customers? Yeah. How are we doing that? What capabilities need to exist? What skills need to exist to deliver those capabilities? And then how does that fit into the org chart? How does that fit into the value case? And that's what the future of it needs to be. I think the 2 biggest trends at the moment, one is AI, and then the second is globally the whole geopolitical situation of actually globalization seems to be a trend that's going into reverse at the moment. And I don't have a view on that, positive or negative. It's just a way I think that we're going down a certain route. So the biggest, I think we may end up in a scenario where over the next 5 years or so, we've done all this work to make global supply chains and certain things work in a certain way. And that may take a little bit of now a step back or a challenge to us, right? So I think it's, for me, I'd probably spend less time worrying about what the new innovative thing is, and actually, can we do the basics better and more continuous? Probably a boring answer, Stephen. I'm sorry. It's probably not what your audience want to hear, but that's my view of the world.
It's a great answer. And we still have a lot of basics to fix, right? And with new emerging companies, we kind of always repeat some of the things we've been doing for the last, years. So we will have a lot to do in that area as well. And I think a lot of what you said also comes down to, again, right? Don't want to go into detail there, right? But there's no standard definition of what is customer success, right? I still talk to people that say, okay, customer success is something in the area of support or services or success or everything that is somehow customer related, right? So there's always someone that's talking to customers. This is onboarding, right? So the customer success management we usually talk about is like the typical customer success manager, but then you have companies where the success manager also does a bit of support or services work, right? So there will always be some kind of customer role, right? Depending on what that is. Maybe we will call them customer impact officer in a few years or customer impact manager, who will know, but yeah, absolutely agree.
It's a hard discussion, right? It's a really, and I think one of our challenges is that we try to do a one size fits all. We try to have the one metric that's going to tell you whether a customer will churn or not. And life just isn't like that. Customers just aren't like that. So to come up with a de facto CSM definition, I've never, so how many CSM teams have I had? 6, I think, over the years. And we were doing, we started doing customer health scores back in 2001, and we had project managers doing what are now de facto CSM jobs. But in each of those times, the CSM role has been somewhat different, somewhat nuanced, and depending on the product, depending on the customer need, more or less has been inserted into the job description. But I do think today too much is expected of the CSM, and I think that needs to be dialed back a bit, right? For me, it comes down to value creation and realization, and being the champion of your customer. The whole does CSMs need to own revenue? I think that's another for me red herring, and that's an overreaction to what's happened to the CSM world. Most CEOs I talk to are not expecting CSM to drive a revenue number, but they are expecting either a customer success qualified lead based on really knowing your customers, generating and driving value, to go back into the sales and account management organization, right?
Which many would already qualify at some kind of revenue driving capability.
Yes,
right? So
the whole CSM, 2 or 3 of the companies I've worked with, the whole CSM must own revenue has driven a whole bunch of other, it's created massive divisions between the sales organization and the CSM organization, where they don't talk to each other, they hide opportunities from each other. It's just, it's a wrong discussion.
Especially what you said around what's comparable, right? It's even having worked in quite a few B2B SaaS companies myself, but also having now consulted a few dozen B2B SaaS companies, there is rarely a team, an approach, a process, an org structure you can completely replicate or copy from one to another, right? And I think that's something which people really need to learn, that even, because I sometimes get this remark, okay, but sorry, we're not talking about B2B SaaS, pretending like B2B SaaS in itself is like this little capsule where you can replicate everything. Even there, you can't replicate it, right? So if we're talking about process, data, organizations, incentivization, all these topics, I ask questions. I try to understand the company. I try to understand also the management team, right? How is it structured? Which organization could work? Could in this team, I don't know, even this question, should I have a chief customer officer, chief commercial officer, chief revenue officer, all these discussions, right? Look at your executive team, right? How is it driven? How is it compensated? What's the goal of this, right? Make this understand, and not this like almost religious discussions about, okay, what needs to be the standard approach for everybody. And to be honest, I know I use LinkedIn also as a bit of a marketing machine, but having these discussions also on the platform, pretending there are these standards, doesn't really help in guiding people really to making a better job, right? It's just pretending there's standards which aren't.
Yeah, I think, I use LinkedIn as a bit of a research mechanism and a reference. I don't. The challenge, I guess, for me for LinkedIn is that everybody's trying to find a one bullet solution, right? There's a silver bullet to everything, and there just isn't. So it just becomes a challenging. It just becomes a challenging point of view, and a lot of the content is around it. It either needs to be that silver bullet, or it needs to be the new shiny thing. And I go back to don't give me the shiny thing. Get the things that should work working properly, right? And that's where I have spent most of my time and where I've generated the most results. And I don't know, 4 IPOs and 2 exits shows me I probably haven't done too much wrong in that process, right? So
absolutely. And this is why you're here, because you have exciting stories to tell. And looking at the clock, I've already used so much of your time, and it was really a great pleasure listening to you, learning again from you, reconnecting with you, right? That was already so much fun, and kind of preparing for this and just getting you motivated for this and getting you inside of the show. So thank you so much for joining. And I would love you to maybe share one piece of advice with everybody, saying, maybe looking also into the future, what do you think right now is either a skill, a role, or something that might define the future of B2B SaaS? With what could you have an impact? Maybe that's something you can provide everybody with before we exit and allow you to have a nice evening in Norway.
I think this isn't a skill in B2B SaaS. This for me is just a skill in life, right? And my life took a very, very particular turn once I learned this, and I learned this in my early 20s. Happiness comes from within, right? Your motivation comes from within. And I think I see a lot of challenges in the day-to-day, and particularly in technology, particularly in B2B SaaS. Don't forget that this is a very incredibly small microcosm of the world, right? There's a big world out there beyond Twitter, X, whatever, beyond social media, beyond all of this stuff. There is a very, very wide world, and it's very easy to become quite sort of, I guess, almost cabin feverish in terms of the world that you're in. And I think one of the trends, one of the things I'm personally working on more as I slowly go into less full-time role, but more consulting. I also want to spend a lot more time helping people on kind of a mental health topic. And one of the things that incredibly worries me is actually like male suicide rate. Male suicide rates under 25 are 4 times what they were in the UK than like 5 or 10 years ago, which is an incredibly scary statistic, right? It's a scary statistic for young men. It's a scary statistic for the human race as a whole, right? If our young people, young men, whatever, are taking their lives at a frighteningly alarming rate. And I think what I see most often than not is a huge amount of stress that goes with working in technology and software as a service. And I think one of the biggest things that you can focus on is understanding that actually happiness comes from within. If your kind of point of view is chasing goals or chasing target, those things, you'll meet them and then it'll be on to the next best thing. So I think one of the things to try and focus and figure out while you build your career, while you do stuff, is how do you get how do you get that happiness, that sense of achievement? And I'm actually spending more time coaching and mentoring people, even CCOs younger in their world, VPs of services, all this kind of stuff. Is that kind of how to think about the world, and in a consistent time of more pressure, more is expected with less resources and whatever. It's how do you keep that working and that in the right frame of mind? Because if that isn't working, the rest of it soon falls apart, right? And I think that for me is a very big topic. It's the human element. At the end of the day, right, we're human beings, and that contact we have, that relationship, the interplay, the being able to reach out and talk to each other is just a fascinating thing. And maybe I'll just put it out there. I have no idea how many viewers this video or whatever will have. If you do want to talk about some of this stuff, if you do want some advice, if you do want some, again, I'm not going to charge you for it. If you want a bit of mentoring, a bit of insights or thought put, or even you just want to talk a little bit about the mental health point, just connect with me on LinkedIn, say hi, send me a message. I'm more than happy to have, just to spend some time and to help work through a particular challenge or a problem you may have, because it's hugely important. And I think not enough focus is spent on that. And that comes from within.
Wonderful. I think those are the perfect departing words, Richard. So thank you so much for joining. Thank you for those words, and thank you also for this message. And honestly, this is the reason why we're talking today, right? Because you're just a great person, and we connected very well on that level. So thank you so much for being that great person. Thank you for also being here today. We will surely reconnect soon. I would advise everybody to connect with Richard, to reach out to him and just get to know him a bit, and then you can share that as well. Thank you so much for joining today, Richard. Have a good
Thank you,
evening.
Stephen.
We will connect very soon, and I really thank you for joining today, and see you soon. So goodbye, have a good evening. And to everybody else, thank you so much. It's a wrap for today. So I hope you had a great time and learned some exciting things from Richard about humanity, about being a good person, about taking care of yourself and of everybody, and also focusing on mental health. Focus on yourself, your family, your friends, what you want to achieve. Maybe don't try to improve every area of your life too much. Focus on your well-being, and other things will follow. So thank you very much for joining. We will be back here next Wednesday, 5 p.m. CET. We will be announcing our next guest on Friday. So thank you for joining, and remember, this journey never ends, to customer value and beyond. And see you next week. Bye-bye.